Chapter 2. Tedros. How not to throw a coronation. Though he had no time for himself, no time for Agatha, no time at all, Tedros refused to get soft. In his knee-length black socks and cut-off breeches, he snuck through the dark, muggy halls of Gold Tower, a towel slung over his bare, tanned chest. He knew it was vain and obsessive, this getting up at 4:30 to exercise, but it felt like the only thing left he could actually control. Because at 6 on the dot, Lady Gremlane and 4 male stewards would barge into his room, and from that moment, until he slogged back into bed at night, he was no longer in charge of his own life. He passed Agatha's room, tempted to slip in and wake her up. But he'd gotten in trouble for that last night, and he didn't need any more trouble. His kingdom was already on the verge of revolt. That's why he'd ceded Lady Gremlane total control over the castle. As Arthur's once steward, she was a known face and gave people faith that the new king would be well managed. But there was another reason he'd let Gremlane keep him on a tight leash. One he could never say out loud. Tedros didn't trust himself as king. He needed someone like Lady Gremlane who could watch his every move, who would check his every decision. If he'd only listened to her at the coronation, none of this would have happened. But he was listening to her now, because if there was one thing he knew, it was that there could be no more mistakes. Last night had already been a serious blunder. Lady Gremlane had warned him not to repeat his father's errors and let a girl interfere with his duties as king. Tedros took this warning seriously. Up until yesterday, he'd done well to concentrate on his tasks and let Agatha concentrate on hers. Even if it meant he'd had more freedom to see Agatha at school than he did now as king in his own castle. But then he'd gone and snuck into her room dead tired, defences down, and acted like a snivelling child. Tedros cringed, replaying the moment in his head. He'd brought Agatha to Camelot, away from everyone and everything she knew, and he wanted her to feel safe and taken care of. He couldn't let her see how weak and scared he was. He couldn't let her see that all he wanted to do was run away with her, to hold her tight and shut the world out. But that's exactly what he had done last night. And for the fleeting relief he'd found in her arms, he left his future queen anxious and worried for him, and his steward angry and disappointed. "Stop acting like a boy," Tedros chastised himself. "Act like a king." So today he let Agatha sleep, even if it left a big black hole in his heart. Tedros scuttled through the hall's colossal gold passage and soaring arches, sweat sopping his wavy blonde hair, his breeches sticking to his thighs. He couldn't remember the castle ever feeling this stifling. 2 mice darted past him into a hole in the plaster. A procession of ants wove around the friezes of famous knights on the wall, now damaged and missing limbs. When his father and mother were king and queen, this hall used to be minty clean, even in the August doldrums. Now, it smelled like a dead cat. Down 3 flights he went, socks slippery on dull gold stone, before he hustled through the gymnasium, a lavish collection of training equipment, surrounded by weapons and armour from Camelot's history, enclosed in glass cases. One would assume this was Tedros's destination, but instead he scurried right through, his pure blue eyes pinned to the dusty floor, trying not to look at the large glass case in the centre of the room. The one case that happened to be empty. Its placard read, Excalibur. He was still thinking about that large empty case when he arrived at King's Cove, a sunken bathing pool in the bowels of the castle. When he was a young prince, this man-made grotto had flowering vines around tall piles of rock and a steaming hot waterfall. The balmy water once shimmered with 1,000 purple and pink lights from fairies who tended the pool in exchange for safe shelter at Camelot. Tedros remembered his mornings here as a child, racing the fairies around his father's statue at the centre of the pool, his tiny opponents lighting up the water like fireworks. King's Cove was different now. The pool was dark and cold, the water algae green. The plants were dead, the waterfall a drip, drip, drip. The fairies were gone too, banished from the castle by Arthur after Guinevere and Merlin had both abandoned him, destroying Arthur's faith in magic. Tedros looked down at the kettlebells he'd stolen from the gym and stashed by the pool, along with a sad, lowly rope he'd tied to the ceiling to practice climbing. He couldn't exercise in that other room, not if he had to be near that empty case and think about where the sword was now. Slowly, his eyes rose to his father's statue in the murky pool, caked with moss and dirt. King Arthur, Excalibur in hand, staring down at him. Only he wasn't staring, at least not any more. His eyes were gone, violently gouged out, leaving 2 big black holes. Tedros endured a wave of guilt, more intense than the one he'd felt in the gym. He'd done it. He'd carved out his own father's eyes because he couldn't bear the old king looking at him after what happened at the coronation. "I'll fix it, father," he vowed. "I'll fix everything." Tedros tossed his towel onto the mildewed floor and dove into the pool, thoughts wiped out by the harsh, stabbing cold. 6 months before, the day of the coronation had been brilliant and warm. Tedros was utterly spent after everything that had happened leading up to it, reconciling with his mother, fighting a war against an evil schoolmaster, and making an all-night ride from school to Camelot in time for him to be crowned king the next day. And yet, despite feeling like a sore, sleepless zombie, he couldn't stop smiling. After so many false starts and twists and turns, he'd finally found his ever after. He was the ruler of the most legendary kingdom in the woods. He'd have Agatha by his side forever. His mother and Lancelot would live with them in the castle. For the first time since he was a child, he had a full family again. And soon a queen to share it with. Any one of those would be a wonderful enough gift on this, his 16th birthday. But the best present of all? Sophie, his old friend-enemy princess witch, had been appointed dean at the school for evil far, far away, where she'd remain at a safe distance from him and Agatha. Which meant no more Sophie thuggery, no more Sophie skullduggery for the rest of their lives. He'd learned from experience that he and that girl couldn't be in the same place without killing each other, kissing each other, or a lot of people ending up dead. Can't Merlin do a spell to make this smell better? Tedros said in front of his bedroom mirror, sniffing at his father's old robes. This thing is rancid. Whole castle is rancid, groused Lancelot, gnawing on a slab of dried beef. And I haven't seen Merlin since he hopped out of the carriage in Maidenvale, said he'd meet us at the castle. Should be here by now. Merlin runs on his own time, Guinevere sighed, sitting next to Lancelot on her son's bed. He'll be here soon. Can't possibly miss my coronation, Tedros said, holding his nose. Maybe if we spritz this with a little cologne? It's a coronation gown, Teddy. You only have to wear it once, said his mother. Besides, I don't smell anything, except whatever it is Lance raided from the pantry. Oh, be serious, Gwen, Lancelot growled, smacking at the bedsheets and spawning a dust storm. What happened to this place? Don't worry. Agatha and I will fix everything, Tedros declared, combing his hair. We knew what we were coming back to. Dad's advisors let the castle go to waste and lined their pockets with the kingdom's taxes. Would have loved to have seen their faces when Lance threw them in the dungeons. Oddly calm, to be honest, as if they expected it, or at least knew better than to fight. Lance said with a loud belch. Insisted I don't have the authority to jail them until Tedros is king. Told them to sod off. They're right, Guinevere clipped. And if you can't eat like a proper human, I'll have the kitchen put you on a vegetable diet. Tedros and Lancelot gaped at her. They're right? Tedros asked incredulously. Vegetables? Lancelot blurted, mouth full. Until your coronation as king is official, the Council of Advisors appointed by Arthur has full authority to decide who runs Camelot, Guinevere explained. But in a few hours you will be king, and it's not like there's a rival with a claim to the throne they can summon out of thin air. That's why the guards didn't stop Lance from jailing them. Reassured, Tedros went back to assessing his reflection. Darling, enough with the mirror. You look beautiful, his mother said. Meanwhile, poor Agatha is getting ready by herself and surely needs a lady's help. Why don't I go to her and leave you here with Lance? Agatha's fine, Tedros said, picking at an annoying pimple near his mouth. God, I'm almost as bad as Sophie, he thought. But he was about to have an entire kingdom judging him. Who wouldn't be self-conscious? Besides, it's my birthday, he added, and I want to spend time with my mother. He saw his mother blush, still unused to him being nice to her. Sounds more like little king's afraid of being alone with me, Lancelot cracked. Call me little again and I'll run you through. Tedros flared, tapping Excalibur on his waist. No one on earth would choose to be alone with you anyway. Except your mother. Likes our alone time just fine, said Lancelot tartly. Oh, good Lord, Guinevere mumbled. In any case, Agatha has that strange steward woman helping her get ready, the one who greeted us when we arrived last night and reeks of perfume, said Tedros, checking his teeth. Wanted to help me get ready, but I said I had you two. Didn't seem happy about it. What's the story there, Gwen? Looked about as thrilled to see you as you did her, said Lancelot. There is no story. She was my steward until after Tedros was born. I had her dismissed. Now she's back, Guinevere said curtly. Well, clearly something happened between you two. Nothing happened. Then why are you making the same face about her as you made around Millie? Who's Millie? Tedros asked. A horny goat that used to chase your mother around the farm, Lancelot said. Guinevere kicked him. God, you two had a lot of free time out there, Tedros muttered into the mirror. Lady Gremlane is irrelevant, said Guinevere, sobering. A steward only has responsibility over a prince until his coronation. After you seal your coronation, you're in charge and can remove Lady Gremlane from the castle once and for all. So what does that mean? Seal my coronation. I repeat a few vows and give a speech? Tedros asked, finally tired of looking at himself. He plopped on a sooty armchair next to the bed. His mother frowned. You said you knew what happened at a coronation. That you didn't need a lecture from us, sniped Lancelot. Well, is there something special about the speech I should know about? Tedros said impatiently. There is no speech, you twit, Lancelot retorted. Tedros blinked. Then when do I introduce you two as part of my royal court? His mother and Lancelot exchanged looks. Teddy, I don't think that's a good move. It's the right move, and the right move is the good move, said Tedros. It's been years since what happened between you two and Dad. I'm sure the people have moved on. Lancelot drew a breath. Tedros, it's not that simple. You're not thinking about all the... If we live in fear, we'll never get anything done, said Tedros, cutting him off. I'll tell this Gremlane woman to seat you on the stage next to me. I'm sure that will go over well, his mother said cryptically. Lancelot gave her another curious look, but Guinevere didn't elaborate. Tedros let the point go. From his one interaction with Lady Gremlane, he was confident his new steward would abide by his wishes. So if there's no speech, then what is there? He asked, reclining against the chair. The chaplain will swear you in and make you repeat your vows in front of the kingdom," his mother said. "Then you have to complete a ceremonial test." Tedros's eyes widened. "Like those written tests we had in good deeds class." "You really are clueless," Lancelot grouched. "It's a test of your father's choosing, written in his will and revealed at the coronation." "Pfft, Dad told me about that. That's not a test," Tedros scoffed. "It's a token gesture. Said he'd never pick something I couldn't do, that he'd pick something to make me look as strong and commanding before my people as possible." "Make you look strong and commanding? That's a test in itself," Lancelot murmured. Guinevere glared at him and moved next to her son. "So I have to perform the test Dad left for me," Tedros said, "and then I'm king." "Then you're king," his mother smiled, ruffling his hair. Tedros smiled back, his heart light as a cloud, even though he'd have to comb his hair again. "But first, there's dancing monkeys," said Lancelot. "Oh, hush," said Guinevere, chortling. Tedros glanced between them. "Very funny." His mother was still laughing. "Very funny," Tedros repeated. "Presenting the Mahaba monkeys of Malabar Hills," the courtier shouted. A cannon blew confetti on the crowd, and the people cheered, at least 50,000 of them, packed onto the hills beneath the castle. Per tradition, the drawbridge had been lowered, inviting citizens of Camelot onto royal grounds. They'd been crossing over since the morning to witness the coronation of King Arthur's son, and yet there were still thousands who wouldn't fit, leaving them stranded on the drawbridge or below the cliffs, peering up at the castle balcony and the beautiful stone stage built for the occasion. Sitting on stage, however, Tedros knew full well it wasn't stone. It was cheap, rickety wood, masked with paint that made it look like stone, and it creaked hideously under the weight of his father's throne. Even worse, hot wax dripped onto his sweltering robes from wobbly candelabras they'd nicked from the castle chapel to save on ceremonial torches. Still, he'd kept his mouth shut. Camelot was broke, and splurging on a coronation would be irresponsible. But now, watching hapless performers from neighbouring realms, he was beginning to lose patience. First, there was a fire-eater from Jaunt Jolie who accidentally set her dress aflame, then a tone-deaf chanteuse from Foxwood who forgot the lyrics to God Save the King, then 2 portly young brothers from Avonlea who fell off a flying trapeze into the crowd, and now apes. If they weren't trying so hard, I'd think they were mocking me, Tedros grumbled, itching under his robes. I'm afraid the more skilled acts were out of budget, Lady Gremlane said from her seat beside him, sipping at a goblet of sparkling water. We did pay for the monkeys, however. They were your father's favourite. Tedros peered downstage at the 6 monkeys in red sequined fedoras scratching their privates and wagging their bums out of sync.
Was this before or after he started drinking?
Tedros said. Lady Gremlane didn't laugh. Agatha would have, he thought peevishly. Not only that, but for a woman who'd been determined to spend time with him, Lady Gremlane didn't seem to like him much. When they first met last night, he'd assumed she thought him handsome and charming and would do anything he asked. But now that they were seated together, she kept throwing him sceptical looks any time he spoke, as if he had the brain of an oyster. It was undermining his confidence right when he needed it most.
I don't understand why Agatha can't sit here with me, he said, squinting at the royal gallery below on the lawn where she was just a shadow, cooped up with the dukes, counts, and other titled nobles. Or my mother, for that matter.
Lady Gremlane straightened her turban. Agatha is not your queen yet. After your marriage, she can join you at official events. As for your mother, given her and Lancelot's ignominious flight from the castle, I thought it best to keep them out of sight and withhold news of their return until a more appropriate time. Tedros followed her eyes to a white scrim curtaining off the balcony behind them. Through the scrim, he could see his mother and Lancelot watching the ceremony with a few maids and kitchen boys. It's a wonder news hasn't leaked, Lady Gremlane added. Lancelot made a spectacle throwing those advisers into the castle jail last night.
Who cares if it had leaked? Tedros countered. The sooner we tell the people my mother and Lance have returned, the better.
Once you are crowned king, you can make your own decisions.
It's just stupid having my own mother confined like a leper while I sit here with you.
Tedros badgered, glancing up at a cloud blocking the sun.
As if you're my queen or something.
Lady Gremlane pursed her lips.
When Merlin gets here, give him your seat, as he'll be my real adviser once I'm king.
Tedros piled on. Merlin won't breach the gates of Camelot. After he deserted your father, Arthur had him banned from the kingdom, said Lady Gremlane. Tedros gave her a bewildered look. Neither Merlin nor his father had ever told him that.
Well, Arthur also put a death warrant on my mother's head, and she's very much alive,
Tedros said brusquely.
I don't follow an ex-king's edict, and neither does Merlin, even if it was my father's.
Then why isn't Merlin here? Lady Gremlane challenged. Tedros bristled, wondering the same thing.
He'll be here. You'll see.
He has to be, the prince thought. The idea of ruling Camelot without Merlin was unfathomable. I wouldn't bet on it. Defying banishment is punished by death, said Lady Gremlane crisply. Tedros snorted.
If you think you can execute Merlin while I'm king, you're as clueless as those monkeys.
A sequined hat hit him in the face, and he swiveled to see the chimps in a violent brawl pummeling each other as the crowd tittered.
Is this really the best we can do?
Tedros moaned. Who planned this idiocy? I did, said Lady Gremlane.
Well, let's hope you're not planning the wedding.
The wedding
is planned entirely by the future queen," Lady Gremlane said, her face a cold mask. "I hope she is capable."
"That's a bet I'm willing to take," said Tedros defiantly, trying not to frown. Agatha, the wedding planner. Hadn't she dressed as a bride for Halloween? If it were up to her, they'd marry at midnight in a boneyard with that satanic cat presiding. "She'll be fine," he thought. Agatha always found a way. She'd no doubt share his opinion of Lady Grimlane and his determination to prove her wrong. Plus, once Agatha saw how he handled his coronation with royal decorum and integrity, she'd follow his example for the wedding. Soon, Lady Grimface would be eating her words. A long while later, after the monkeys had been soothed with a vat of banana pudding and dragged from the stage, Tedros took his place before Camelot's chaplain, perilously old, with a bright red nose and wiry hair growing out of his ears. The chaplain put his hand on Tedros's back and guided him to the front of the stage, overlooking the teeming hills. On cue, the sun broke out from behind the cloud, spilling on to the young prince. An awed hush fell over the crowd. Tedros could see the legions gazing up at him with wide-eyed hope. The boy who vanquished the schoolmaster. The boy who saved the Ever-Kingdoms. The boy who would make Camelot great again. "I'm king of all these people," Tedros rasped, the weight of responsibility finally hitting him.
Oh, your father asked the same thing, lad. Fear is a very good sign," the old chaplain said, hacking a laugh. "And luckily, no one can hear us from way up here." The chaplain turned to a skinny, red-haired altar boy who carefully handed him a jeweled box. The chaplain opened it. Sunlight ricocheted through 5 spires like a web of gold, eliciting gasps from the mob. Tedros gazed down at King Arthur's crown, the 5-pointed fleur-de-lis, each with a diamond in the centre. Once, when he was 6, he'd stolen it from his father's bed table and worn it to his lessons with Merlin, insisting the wizard bow and call him king. He assumed Merlin would put an end to his mischief, but instead the wizard obeyed his command, bowing eminently and addressing him as Your Majesty all the way through math and astronomy and vocabulary and history. Perhaps the old wizard would have let him be king forever. But soon the young prince removed his crown and sheepishly returned it to his father's table, for it was too heavy for his soft little head. Now, 10 years later, the chaplain held out the very same crown. "Repeat after me, young prince. The words might sound a bit funny, given it's an oath that harkens back 2,000 years, but words aren't what make a king. That fear you feel is all you need. Fear means you know this crown has a history and future far bigger than you. Fear means you are ready, dear Tedros. Ready to quest for glory.
Legs quivering, Tedros repeated the chaplain's oath. By thy Lord, on rest that goddess doth place on my head, I swear to uphold the honour of Camelot against all foul. I swear to be a beacon in the dark knell to thy enlightened realm. Like the old man warned, he tripped over the strange syllables and sounds without knowing what he was saying. And yet, somewhere in his heart, he did. His eyes welled up the moment getting to him. Just a few years ago, he was a first-year boy at the school for good and evil, full of bluster and insecurity. Now, the boy would be a king, a husband, and someday a father. Tedros made a silent prayer that he would do good as all three, just like the man who had made him, a man who he loved and missed every single day of his life, a man he'd give anything to touch one last time. The chaplain placed the crown upon Tedros's head, and tears streamed down the young king's cheeks, while the crowd roared a passionate ovation that lasted long after he'd managed to get his emotions under control. The chaplain patted his shoulder. And now, to seal the coronation and officially make you king, you must complete the ceremonial tests. Do you mind if I say a few words first? He asked the chaplain. To my people, I mean.
The chaplain furrowed. It is a bit unusual to speak before the proceedings are complete, especially since no one will hear you.
Something fell from above, right into the folds of Tedros's oversized robe, a small, five-pointed white star, like the ones Merlin used to lay in tribute at his father's tomb in Avalon. Strange, Tedros said, studying it closely. Why would one of these be? His voice instantly amplified for miles. The crowd gaped in astonishment, as did the chaplain, but Tedros knew full well where such sorcery had come from. He looked up into the big blue sky and smiled. "Thanks, Em," he whispered. Then he put the magic star on his shoulder so it would broadcast him far and wide. "Felt funny looking down at all of you without saying hello," he spoke, his voice resounding over the cliffs. "So, hello. I'm Tedros, and welcome to the show." Crickets. "Right. You know who I am. Same boy who used to stand here and fidget when my father gave speeches. Just older now, and hopefully a bit better looking." A ripple of laughter. Tedros smiled, feeling the warmth of the crowd. They wanted to hear from him. They wanted him to do well.
He searched for Agatha below, but the sun washed out the faces. He was so used to having his princess by his side when it mattered. But after all they'd been through, he could feel her inside him even when they were apart. What would she tell him to say? The same thing she always told him to say, the truth about what he was feeling. Only he was never very good at that. Tedros took a deep breath.
When I was a boy, standing up here with my dad, good and evil seemed so black and white, he said, his voice steadying. But of all the things I learned at school, one lesson proved the most important. No one knows what is good or bad until after the story is written. No one knows if a happy ending will last or if a happy ending is happy at all. The only thing we have is the moment we are in and what we choose to do with it. And so, here we are, at this moment. A moment where riding into Camelot doesn't feel the same as it used to when I was a boy. We aren't the shining kingdom by which all others are measured anymore. The streets are dirty. The people are hungry. And I can feel a rot at our core. Even the king's chamber smells a bit mouldy. Part of it is neglect, of course, Tedros went on, and those responsible have been removed from power and punished. But that won't fix our problems. Even if we could bring back my father, King Arthur couldn't make things the way they were. The woods have been changed forever by an evil schoolmaster, and though he is dead now, the line between good and evil has blurred. Enemies disguise as friends, and friends as enemies. Look at our own Camelot, decayed from the inside.
The masses were rapt as they listened, their bodies like trees in a windless forest.
I may be young. I may be untested. But I trust my instincts, Tedros declared, confidence growing. Instincts that helped me find my way back to you, even when I had evil's sword at my heart and an axe at my neck. Instincts that helped me choose the greatest of all princesses, soon to be your queen.
Everyone followed his eyes to the royal gallery, where the nobles stepped back, revealing Agatha in the sun's spotlight. Tedros smiled, expecting applause. He didn't get it. The crowd took in her pallid, ghostly face, buggy brown eyes and witchy black helmet of hair, and then seemed to look around her, as if she was a stand-in for the great princess Tedros was speaking of, as if they couldn't believe that this was the Agatha whose fairy tale had grown so famous throughout the endless woods. But then they saw the diadem on her head, the same tiara Arthur once bestowed upon his own wife, and their postures stiffened, a soft murmur building. Together, Agatha and I have faced down terrible villains and found our happy ending, said Tedros. but after a fairy tale comes real life. This is no longer my and Agatha's story written by the historian. This is the story of our kingdom, which we must all write together. A history and future you are now a part of. Even those who doubted my father, even those who doubt me. Today, we turn the page. He took a deep breath. And to prove that this is indeed the beginning of a new Camelot, my first act as your king is to present 2 members of my royal court. 2 people who know our kingdom better than anyone, and will protect it with love and courage. From the corner of his eye, he saw Lady Gremlane leap out of her seat. In a flash, Tedros tomahawked Excalibur across the stage, slashing open the scrim over the castle balcony before the sword planted blade first in the balcony's archway. Presenting my mother, Queen Guinevere, and our greatest knight, Sir Lancelot. Tedros beamed down at the crowd, believing full-heartedly that since he'd learned to forgive Guinevere and Lancelot, his people would do the same. But now there was a collective, wide-eyed gape, as if they'd all stopped breathing, and a cold, deathly silence. "Come, Mother, come, Lance," Tedros prodded, hurrying over to his mother and yanking at her hand. Gobsmacked, Guinevere stumbled over the fallen scrim, losing a shoe and almost face-planting before Lancelot caught her and glared daggers at Tedros. "What the hell are you doing?" "Sit down," Tedros hissed, shoving his one-shoed mother into his throne and Lancelot into Lady Gremlane's seat, while Lady Gremlane gawped in horror. Something in the crowd changed too. Tedros felt it in his gut, the way the once warm, hopeful air had turned wary upon his unveiling of Agatha, and now had become menacing and tense. Sweat pooled beneath his crown. His heart had told him welcoming back his mother and Lancelot was the right thing to do. The good thing. Did I make a mistake? He swallowed his doubt. No going back now. "Let's get to the test." Tedros pressured the chaplain, eager to seal this coronation and get his mother and Agatha inside. "Yes, of course," the chaplain stammered, his eyes darting to Guinevere and the knight as he fumbled a faded parchment card from his robes. Hear ye, hear ye. As all prior kings, King Arthur Pendragon conceived this test to prove his successor be worthy of... Tedros ripped the card from his hands and read it out loud, his voice booming through the magic star. "To seal his coronation, the future king of Camelot must pull Excalibur from an ordinary stone as I once did." "Wow, that's easy," he blurted, voice echoing. He hadn't meant for the crowd to hear that. "Can someone find me a stone?" Tedros puffed, glancing uselessly around the stage. Lancelot shifted in his chair, which made the stage creak so loudly the audience's eyes went to him.
"Preferably one that isn't made out of wood," the knight said.
A ruckus echoed behind him, and everyone turned to see the red-haired altar boy careen through the fallen scrim onto the stage, having tripped on Guinevere's shoe. "Sorry, that's my cue," he squawked, dragging an iron anvil behind him. "Behold, the stone from which King Arthur once pulled Excalibur—" The heavy anvil splintered the wooden platform. The edge of the stage imploded, and the anvil plummeted straight through the hole like a cannonball down to a cliff where it bounced off the rock and fell into the ocean.
"This is going well," said Lancelot.
Tedros scorched pink. His mother's eyes were glued to her one shoe. Lady Gremlane wasn't on the stage anymore, and he couldn't even look in Agatha's direction. He'd wanted the coronation to show her what kind of a king he'd be. Instead, she was probably as mortified as he was.
"Merlin?
Some help?" He peeped desperately, glancing upwards. A pigeon pooed, just missing his head.
"Enough!"
Tedros boiled, jaw clenching.
"To seal the coronation, I have to pull a sword from a stone. Well, the sword's in one right now."
He stamped to the back of the stage and the once curtained-off castle balcony, where Excalibur was still lodged blade first into the stone archway.
"So if I pull my sword out of this stone, it's done, right? We can all go home?"
He barked at the chaplain.
"Well, I don't believe your father meant—"
"Is it done, or is it not?"
Tedros bullied. The chaplain quailed.
"Oh, yes, I suppose."
Tedros grabbed the hilt, practically screeching into the star on his shoulder, deafening the crowd.
"Then, in the name of my father, my kingdom, and my people, I hereby accept my place as leader, protector, and king of Camelot."
He pulled at the sword. It didn't move.
"Huh?"
Tedros jerked harder. Still didn't budge. He could hear the restless mob shifting. Putting his foot on the wall, he pried at the blade with all of his strength, his biceps straining against his skin. Nope. Nothing. Tedros was sweating now. He pulled right, left, front, back, trying to make the sword slide, but with each pull it seemed to bury harder into the stone. It didn't make sense. Excalibur wasn't wedged that deep, and the archway's stone was loamy and weak. Why wasn't it moving? People in the crowd were clutching each other, pointing at him open-mouthed. They knew what was happening. They knew, after promising to save them as king, he was failing the first test that would make him king. A test that shouldn't have been a test at all. "Merlin," he pleaded. But the sky was clear overhead. The white star on his shoulder, lost and gone. He couldn't breathe, his wet grip on the hilt making his pulls shallow and frantic, his crown skewed on his head, his coronation gown ripped at the seams. "Please," he begged, heaving at the sword. "Please." Lancelot ran up. "Just yank the damn thing out," he said, helping him jostle the hilt. Tedros shoved him away. "It's my test. I have to do it." But he pushed Lancelot too hard, who knocked backwards straight into the chaplain, upending the old man over the balcony. His priestly gown got caught on the railing, leaving him dangling upside down, robes over his head, exposed save for his saggy pantaloons. Gold coins showered out of his pockets onto the crowd, causing a stampede for them as the chaplain howled. The altar boy ran to help his master, only to plunge through the hole in the stage left by the lost anvil. Paralysed, Tedros scanned the scene. Lancelot hoisting the chaplain over a balcony, Guinevere lurching to rescue a squealing altar boy hanging off a beam, his kingdom's people punching each other for a handful of coins, and 6 monkeys straddling a sword stuck in stone, slathering it with banana pudding and sliding up and down the blade. Tedros dropped to his knees.
"It's them!"
a woman bellowed down below, pointing at Lancelot and Guinevere.
"They've cursed us! They've cursed Camelot!"
"Right from the beginning," an old man yelled.
"Why do you think Arthur wanted 'em dead?"
his wife shouted.
"Traitors!"
a young boy heckled. "Finks!" From the masses exploded a murderous mob, climbing up the stage's beams towards Guinevere and Lancelot. "Get them! Kill them!" But the beams couldn't support their weight and shattered like sticks, sending the remainder of the stage timbering down over the crowd. The candles igniting the wood and pooled wax and detonating the stage like a fireball into the drawbridge. Shrieking villagers fled for their lives just as royal guards came smashing out the balcony windows, armed with swords and spears, led by Lady Gremlane. "Traitors!" the terrible cries echoed below. "Monsters!" As people hurled things at the balcony, guards grabbed Guinevere and Lancelot and spirited them inside to safety, along with the others. Only Tedros stayed behind, pulling and pulling at Excalibur, his bleeding hands slick with pudding, his face streaked with tears, before he suddenly felt the arms of men throw him over their shoulders. "No, I can do it!" he choked, hands flailing for the sword. "I can do it!" He screamed those words again and again, voice crumbling to rasps as they dragged him into the castle, until all that remained of Camelot's great hope was a sobbing little boy, crown slid down over his eyes, hands stabbing wildly into the dark.